In this episode, I'm speaking with Polly Allen. Polly is an expert in artificial intelligence, and I'll be speaking with her about ChatGPT. This is a topic that you need to learn more about. I think you'll have a better understanding for what GPT can do and how you can take advantage of it in your career. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 313 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for a discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I'm speaking with Polly Allen. Polly is an expert in artificial intelligence, and I'll be speaking with her about ChatGPT. This is a topic that you need to learn more about. I think you'll have a better understanding for what GPT can do and how you can take advantage of it in your career. Polly Allen has over 20 years of experience developing software and building and leading software teams, most recently leading data science and engineering teams as a principal product manager for Alexa AI at Amazon. At Alexa, she led the generative artificial intelligence projects using technology similar to ChatGPT. As a leader in the application of machine learning, she is passionate about DEI in the space and empowering more people to understand, leverage, and participate in the field. She founded a AI Career Boost, an education company, an AI education company in November 2022, aiming to increase diversity in the AI industry. Polly is an experienced angel investor, a board member at the Center for Workplace Inclusion Labs, and futurist keynote speaker. She holds a Master's of Science in Software Engineering from MIT and the University of Victoria, and an MBA from the University of British Columbia. I've been working with ChatGPT for about a month, and the more I learn how to use the tool, the more I'm blown away about what is possible. My buddy Ryan Roten said in a recent LinkedIn Live, "You may not lose your job to ChatGPT, but you could lose it to someone who knows how to use it." This episode is well worth your time. This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot community, but more on that later. Now, on to my discussion with Polly Allen. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Polly Allen on the podcast, and she is an AI expert, because we're going to talk about ChatGPT. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
And so Polly came and talked to us at the Encore Network about, will ChatGPT take our jobs? And this is something that I am been digging around with ChatGPT for the last month, and I am just amazed. So Polly, this is something called AI, or artificial intelligence, and more importantly, it's generative AI. What the heck is that?
Great question. So generative AI is a little bit what it sounds like, right? You're going to generate text or images. And this is as opposed to artificial intelligence that does things like looks for patterns in data to classify things or derive decisions, right? So this is the first time that we're seeing at a large scale popularization of AI that can autocomplete sentences, that can chat back and forth with you conversationally, or do things we've seen like generate me a blog post or generate me an email, generate me a poem. So based on a set of instructions, you can ask it to write or rewrite text content.
I've been amazed. I've been using it to rewrite headlines and titles. Very cool.
Yeah, it's something that people are really just starting to work out how it fits into their day-to-day work. But you can see it already. Just last week, it was announced that both Microsoft and Google have integrated the features that come from ChatGPT and other large language models like them into Microsoft Office. So you can use them within Office to say, write a document within Word. You can use it to do analysis of your Excel spreadsheets and generate a whole write-up or report based on data in Excel. You can even generate PowerPoint slides. So it's exciting to see all the ways that it can be used within productivity tools like that.
So in your presentation, you talked about 5 things you can do with ChatGPT. Because I found this helps frame it nicely.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, the first one that we're seeing a lot of interest in is research. And you'll maybe have heard in the news that Microsoft is integrating the ChatGPT transformer technology with Bing, their search engine, so that you can do online research using this more question and answer interface than the usual way of doing search on Google. Right? So you can ask for a question or ask it to synthesize information from multiple websites. So instead of typing in a question and getting back one snippet from one website, or maybe a list of blue links where you have to tap into each one, it can give you a nice, concise report as if an assistant had gone and looked at all those links for you and tailored an answer just for what you were looking for in that question. So that's something that's really changing the face of search across the board. And it's a really interesting way where you can see quickly how you can save time doing research if you are trying to do it either through ChatGPT or Bing's new search interface.
We talked before we got on. I wanted to know, I have an avocado tree in my backyard. Do we plant another avocado tree? Because we don't know how old this tree is, but it's very mature. How long do they last? And it came back with a much more nuanced answer than when I typed it into Google, which just gave me a bunch of links.
Exactly. Another great example for the courses I teach in AI, I wanted to figure out how I could give people certificates that they could add on LinkedIn for completing my courses. But I didn't really know what that service is called, and I didn't know what words to put in Google. But by asking the question of, I want to deliver a certificate online, I found out right away that there's services that provide this. Here's the top 3. And I could ask it to even output a table saying, what are the pros and cons of each and the costs of each, all in one shot, instead of me having to look at a bunch of different websites to figure that out.
So the second one is ideate. This is the one I have found to be very useful.
It's great. It's great for brainstorming. So you can ask ChatGPT for ideas for a children's birthday party, ideas for gifts. A lot of people are using it for writing, saying, give me 10 writing prompts about blah, blah, blah topic. Even ideas like lesson plans for teachers. Who are trying to come up with ways to teach ideas to students, for example. So it's kind of a brainstorming tool. Often I've found that the answers aren't necessarily as, the most creative, right? This is a remix of information that it's learned online. But sometimes when you just feel like you can't get the ideas flowing, it can be super handy. And you can kind of go back and forth and say, give me more like number 2, but with this adjustment in that chat style interface.
The next one is write.
Right. So this is one of the generative AI case we talked about, right? Where you're giving it a set of instructions and asking it to write something for you. This doesn't necessarily just mean English text, right? It can be in any language. It can also be in code. So there's been a lot of success with these models helping computer programmers write code more quickly, where it asks them, just write me a function that adds 2 numbers, and it can do it very quickly. But writing could, the nice thing here too, is you can ask it to write in the style of Shakespeare or in the style of Hamilton lyrics, however you want to adjust the tone. I find it helps me to write things, a draft of things, if I want it to be, say, at the fourth grade reading level or the eighth grade reading level. That really, really helps me keep my language really simple for those examples.
Yeah, I was on a LinkedIn Live with my buddy Ryan Roten this last week, and he was talking about rewriting your about section in your LinkedIn profile. So he fed it in and he says, oh, yeah, do this from a branding expert's perspective. Keep it under 2,600 characters. And by the way, be a little snarky, but no cuss words, because he's learned that if he says snarky, that it may throw in a few little zingers. Yes. And it was interesting watching him learning how to talk to it to generate what he wanted to get out of it.
Exactly. It does take some practice to kind of understand how it's going to interpret your instructions, right? Oh, I was just going to say that's where there's a lot of free guides online now that show you examples of how to write prompts. They're called, that's the instructions you're giving to ChatGPT. If you just Google it, there's a bunch of people who have been doing the experimentation and are putting their best prompts out there online for you to play around with, especially in the area of writing or rewriting your resume. I find that's something, there's a lot of really great material out there on how to personalize your resume and make it specific for a job application, et cetera, which is a great use case.
Well, it's also, I was listening to a Wall Street Journal podcast yesterday, day before, and it was on how people were using this in the job search. And one of them is with writing samples. What's happened is a lot of people were getting writing samples that came out of ChatGPT. And what they're now saying is, yes, you can use it because it's just another tool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
This reminds me, I went to engineering school in the 1970s. I remember going through numerical analysis class, and the professors really struggled because we were the first set of students who had the really fancy, high-powered calculators. And so they just gave us more and more difficult problems that you just had to calculate a lot more. Didn't know how to assess us based on, just how fast we could get on the calculator, which doesn't really tell you anything. And I think the same thing here is, particularly for writing,
is going to have to change how we assess students when they're doing this. There's been motions to ban ChatGPT in a lot of schools, but we're also seeing some professors at universities saying, I'm actually going to require it, but I'm going to require you tell me when you're using it. I'm going to require you tell me what your prompt was, right? Because that's the only way I can fairly assess how you're approaching the problem.
Yeah. Well, it's also if you're looking for someone who can write a marketing plan. If you want a base marketing plan, this will generate far faster than you can do it yourself.
Exactly. And what's interesting is I find like a marketing expert might be able to look at the ChatGPT generated marketing plan and go, oh, well, I can do slightly better than this. I would tweak it this way. This is like a C plus B, B level marketing plan. But as a non-expert, it always looks great to me, right? I'm not a marketer. So I'm always like, well, this got me started. And I'm just at the level where, B is good enough, right?
That's right.
So I think there'll always be this need for humans to come in and really, add that value of personalizing things, adding the extra layers of wisdom that make these things the A and A plus when they need to be. But basically, when you just need something that's a C or B plus level, it can be generated automatically now, which is crazy.
This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot membership community. The Career Pivot membership community is a group of people from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they did not know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learn from each other and broaden their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Vicky had to say about being part of the community.
For me, I would say it's the resources that you've made available to the community, whether it's bringing on speakers who have insights into the current hiring and job searching trends, especially during the pandemic. This has been so useful. Highlighting companies that are providing remote work for older adults. And again, this is how I was able to get my current part-time job, but also helping me to see new possibilities about what work might look like now and in the immediate future, because this is so important. The traditional jobs that our generation was raised with have essentially evaporated. And so that's really what's been most helpful to me most recently.
You can't just join the community. I bring people into the community every few months in groups. You can sign up for the waiting list, so when I open the door for new members, you'll be notified. If you're interested in learning more about the endeavor and sign up for the waiting list, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, back to the episode. The next one was rewrite.
Yeah, so I make that distinction. We kind of talked about both a little bit before, but write is really you're just giving it a set of instructions and it writes something. Rewrite is you're giving it instructions and you're giving it some text that you're asking it to change in some way, whether you're saying, here's some bullet points, please write the whole essay, or here's a whole essay, please write me some bullet points and summarize them. It could also involve translation. You can translate from one language to another fairly adequately. So this is a case where you can repurpose content lots of different ways too. So if you said, I want to write a blog post, now please use this and pull out 10 LinkedIn posts or social media posts related to this that are going to convert well, for example. It just takes a lot less brain power to reuse content.
Yeah, I was on a search engine optimization webinar using ChatGPT. And the one thing they commented that it was good for asking to rewrite things possibly with improve the click-through rate, and then ask ChatGPT, how do they do that? What they found it was not good for was saying, okay, give me the best keywords. It would tell you some stuff, but it doesn't have access to the keyword history.
Exactly. Things like keywords are shifting all the time. And
yes,
it's important to note that ChatGPT's, all of its knowledge is stuck back in 2021 and earlier,
yep.
right?
Yep.
So there's things that you would not want to use it for as the authority. And you're better off using, a database that someone's collecting these in real time, like Answer the Public or something, where you can get a good idea of what the most relevant current keywords are instead of looking back at 2020 or 2021.
Right. And the last one is simulate.
Yeah, this one's really interesting. We kind of mentioned it earlier too, that idea of asking it to act as an expert. So whether you're saying act as a marketing expert, act as a bike repair technician, act as an avocado tree expert, right? The idea is that you'll get much more expert and realistic answers if you're asking it to simulate someone. And this is, I think, too, the one that instills the most fear in people, because people are like, well, if I can just ask this to act as a physician and tell me what's wrong with my skin rash, are we on the verge of replacing physicians with ChatGPT, which is a danger, just because there's still so long a journey to go for these models to really be reliable, and they don't have the context of the real world to operate from. So we're a long way from really replacing people and jobs using these models, but they are a great assistive tool, especially if you're not an expert in a place and you want to say, like, confirm something that you thought was true, for example, like the age of your avocado trees.
I had, again, I was on one other webinar, and they were talking about the fact that you almost think of this ChatGPT as your intern.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But a very young intern who doesn't know much about the real world.
And you need to tell it exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And be very careful that your intern might not want to appear incompetent, so might tell you some things, even if it's not very sure if it's true.
Yes, because you've got some slides on factual inaccuracy. In other words, sometimes I like to say it makes stuff up.
Exactly. And it's a combination of two things. One, it's a language model that really is just looking for patterns in the language it's been trained on and is really just spitting out the next most likely word to come up in the answers. There's no notion of logic under the hood. So in GPT-3, for example, it was fairly easy to trick it by asking it questions like, who's taller, Biden or Trump? And it would proudly answer, oh, Joe Biden is 6 feet and Trump is 6'3", and Joe Biden is taller. You have to go, wait, no, 6'3" is taller. So it wouldn't have a notion of what taller means, right?
Yeah.
And so in all the headlines about ChatGPT as passed the bar exam or passed the medical exam, people were really skipping over the fact that actually it's pretty easy to trip it up in logic questions. How is X related to Y? Things like that. I have noticed that there's a big improvement in GPT-4 on that particular kind of error. But the other kind of error, which is a little more worrying, are the hallucinations, they call it, where it's simply making up facts based on, the likelihood that these words belong together. And those can be disturbingly hard to find, right? Those are the ones that sound very plausible and that a non-expert will easily kind of go, yeah, that sounds right. So for example, in GPT-3, often if you asked for it to generate a page, an essay with references, it would generate really plausible sounding references with authors you'd heard from that area. And then you'd look and find out, oh, these references either don't exist or they don't make the claims at all that it's saying it makes the claims in the paper it's generated, right? So it's that degree of fact checking that you have to do.
Yeah, there's no question. Whenever it generates text, you need to check it.
100%. And I think that's where what's interesting is that all of these providers of these models have said, we're not going to be responsible for what you do with this. So if you take the text from this and put this out on your website claiming something is true, it's on you if it turns out to be that something's not quite right, right? So I think people need to know that they're taking on that responsibility.
How is this going to affect their jobs?
Really great question. It's been very hard to say because it's evolving so very quickly. And there's been a lot of debate about, well, how much can a tool that's only right some of the time really be relied upon, right? But what we are seeing is that there are early studies showing that it is a great efficiency optimization tool. So in a lot of cases, programming is a great example. Microsoft had released GitHub Copilot last year, which is a generative tool that generates code for programmers. And they're seeing an increase of over 50% efficiency. They can write 50% more code using this tool than without it. It doesn't necessarily mean the programming job's going away, right? And there's a lot of higher level logic, design. In fact, the part that people in those positions really prefer to do and would rather spend their time doing. And so that's a great example, I think, of how this is going to change a lot of jobs and not necessarily have jobs completely disappear. There is a great hint of how the job market is heading. It's from a book called AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee, who was the head of Google China for many years. And he has a great matrix where on one end, he talks about optimization-based jobs, where if you're doing your job well, things are happening faster or more correctly than before. And the other end of the spectrum is more creative or strategy-based jobs, right? So optimization might be like assembly line worker or customer service representative. And the more creative or strategy-based jobs might be, CEO or criminal defense attorney, right? The other dimension he talks about is how social that job needs to be and how much of the human relationship is part of that job. So the more social a job, something like a wedding planner, you actually want to have a relationship with that person, right? Versus if you're like, I'm just trying to get my credit card bill paid. I don't need to have a relationship with the person I'm on the phone with, right? I'm perfectly happy if this is actually a chatbot that I'm communicating with, if it helps me get the job done faster, right? So the more social and the more creative or strategic the job, his point is that's the safe zone, right?
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that some of the jobs he would have considered safe because they at least, even if they're not super creative or strategic, they have more of that social veneer. Things like a therapist or like your general GP doctor, right? Where they're not necessarily crafting a long-term care plan for you, but if you're coming in with a cold, they're looking at three things and saying, yes, no, do you need antibiotics, right? We were very used to, prior to the pandemic, we were very used to that being a human. And I think the one thing that's happened since this book, it was published in 2017, since this book, the pandemic has meant we're much more used to doing a lot more things online, separate from a human and doing them more virtually, right? So prior to 2020, many of us would not have considered seeing a therapist online or through the computer. So it's just added that extra layer of taking the sort of the social advantage away in some of those jobs, right? So the more that you can make sure that your job is, part of your job is building those social relationships with your customers, the more you're kind of building some protection around what you do.
What occupations are going to be the most disrupted?
So some of the ones that are most disrupted include teaching is a big one, right? So, and by disrupted, I don't mean it'll go away, right? I just mean in terms of how things are going to change, who's got the biggest amount of change to deal with. So teachers are definitely caught a little, surprised by the power of GPT right now and really wondering how they're going to manage this. There are some advantages for them in terms of hey, building a lesson plan. I now have tools that can really help me kind of think through and quickly write this out instead of as much time as it used to take. But when the information is available online that you're teaching, and students have ways now of interacting with systems that can teach them in their learning style automatically, teachers need to figure out new ways to make their teaching style kind of value proposition, teaching in niche areas, right, where they teach in particularly people who don't learn as well from like text reading and things like that. Some of the other ones are ones where there's a lot of just like paperwork and administration. So legal, a lot of folks are predicting there'll be a lot of disruption in legal where instead of having them spend an hour writing out a contract for you, a lot of people are bringing contracts to lawyers now written by ChatGPT and said, "Can you please just check this?" Right? This now takes 10 minutes instead of an hour, and on a lot of things with like insurance and areas where there's a lot of paperwork and things that are going to be massively disrupted.
What are the top industries? By the way, legal services, financial investments, agencies, business support services, education and training, travel arrangements, and computer systems design.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting how some of these are, there are areas that normally, in the Industrial Revolution, it was physical labor that was impacted. And what's interesting here is these are all, things that are done by folks who are highly educated and more of this, this disruption of knowledge workers instead of physical labor. In fact, if you do more physical labor or something that is more interactive, like being a massage therapist, for example, you might be more protected from the change that's coming.
Yeah, the interesting one was a number of years ago. I lived in Austin, Texas for 40 years, and I belonged to one of the major speakers clubs. And we brought in several of the lead people from the medical school there in Austin. And one of the things they said we are de-emphasizing memorization with the training of doctors. And this is 6-7 years ago. And, people were going, "Oh my gosh." And the answer is, if you have, with things changing so fast, and if you have people who know how to use these tools and they can say, okay, what are the possibilities? It might spit out things they hadn't thought of.
Precisely. And I think it's either providing kind of, hey, here's all your options and providing things you might not have thought of. Or in a lot of cases, it's automating like the parts of people's jobs that they didn't really enjoy doing anyway, right? So the more creative, more strategic part of people's jobs is often the part that they wish they had more time to spend doing, right? So that's where those huge efficiency gains can come into play.
I would normally say in 5 years, what do you think this will look like?
Oh.
But who knows? How about in a year?
I was like, I'll have a hard time saying in 5 weeks right now.
Where
So,
do you see this going?
I guess there's two kind of possible distinctions. And so there's like the dark path where things, the dangerous things can happen. And then there's the light path of optimism, right? You'll hear people on both sides of that coin. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about both. There's some really big risks with this technology, that it has just become incredibly cheap for bad actors to spread misinformation that sounds really, really real, right? You used to be able to tell spam or fake email scams because often the English wasn't very good. And you go, there's no way this is actually from Wells Fargo Bank because they can't spell anything, right? All of a sudden now you don't have to be able to speak English well to write 57 variations on that spam email and send that out. So the degree to which you can send out scams, there's definitely already been a rise in fake job postings where people can write a job posting that looks a lot like other job postings from that same company in the same style and tone. And then people end up getting told, you got the job, now please send us some money so we can send you a laptop. And it turns out it wasn't a real job, right? So I think we're going to have to learn a new level of kind of vigilance to understand what is really true and versus what is just noise out there. There's going to be just a lot more noise. But on the opportunity side, it's really exciting. I've been just itching to play more with like the office productivity tools to think about what are the things that we can quickly, things that that are now automatable, and what other tools can we bring out of this, right? Some of the tools that I'm excited about, there was one I saw called Be My Eyes. So it's not just using the text capabilities of ChatGPT, it's using these new multimodal capabilities where it can take in a picture and then tell you what's in the picture and do some analysis. So Be My Eyes is a company that allowed people with low visibility, low sight, to take pictures of things in their daily lives and say, like, what is in this vending machine? Or what's at the bottom of these stairs, right? And they used to operate on a model where volunteers from around the world would text, oh, don't go down those stairs, there's a big no crossing sign or something. And that would be read back out to them from their phone. Well, now they don't have to depend on volunteers. They're actually using the model, right, to basically use their phone to be their eyes for them. So there's so many things like this that are just begun to be possible because of this technology, that are really exciting to a lot of folks for the opportunities that they're going to unlock.
Having lived in the leading edge technology world for many years, it's always amazing how things are used in ways that you had no idea they were going to be used in that way.
Exactly. So there's good actors and bad actors with any of these things. But it's interesting that this very, very powerful technology has become, widespread so quickly and very, very cheap so quickly. And that's what I think leads a lot of people to be very worried that there's no way, our regulatory systems are equipped to keep up with this pace of change. And so how do we react to the malevolent use of these by bad actors?
As I said, I was on a webinar with my buddy Ryan Roten the other day, and he was saying that, you're probably not going to lose your job to this, but you may lose your job to someone who knows how to use it better.
Right. And I know a lot of people are exhausted right now and kind of go, oh gosh, I have to learn one more thing.
Yeah.
But the good news is it's free to at least try it out, at least for now. And that it's really like typing instructions to an assistant, right? This, as far as accessibility and learning, it feels a lot more like playing around with something than, say, like, now you have to learn how to code or something really intimidating like that.
Well, I've found it's just a matter of me learning how to talk to it, and I like talking to things. So it's relative. I have found it easy to deal with once I understand how to frame things up. The more information I give it as to what I want. And so firstly, you have to know what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And then just simply tell it, here's what I want. And then you can have a conversation. It's not like I have to do it in one step.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the beauty of that chat interface, is that you can get it something, and if it's not quite right, you can ask it to refine it. Yeah. Another thing I've seen people do is ask them, hey, I want the following things. Can you write the best prompt for me? Yep. And you can actually get ChatGPT to write the request for you. So I think it's kind of a cool use of it as well.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of things about it that once I started and once I understood how it deals with what you ask, and then I see other people doing this, that, or the other thing. And that's why the prompts.chat website, and I'll put that in the show notes, I found very useful, because the more examples I see going, oh, you can do that. Well, then can I do this? Let me go try.
Exactly. I think that's what I love about those big collections of these, is they just start to give you ideas. And I've known so many folks who went, oh gosh, I started trying it out and I'm down a rabbit hole. But it's been, I know, I've had several folks now, like my mother-in-law was in love with it, and she's been using it to write both like positive reviews for folks, or letters of like complaint if a sale, a big purchase didn't go the way she wanted. And she was like, oh, wow, this is so much easier to just give it the set of instructions instead of having to spend that time thinking about how to word it, whether it's too sharp or too polite. Yeah. And you can always take it and massage it a little bit afterwards, if it gets 80% of the way, right?
Yeah, on the Career Pivot community, we did a session the other day just playing around with it. And one of the things near the end, we came up with saying, can you give me 5 recipes for using broccoli? And then we kept on refining it and finally saying, yeah, we want to make it vegan. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And just kept on refining and refining and refining. And it was just quite fascinating what, saying, well, I don't want 50110.
Right. Exactly. And what's fascinating to me is that already, we're just kind of getting our hands around ChatGPT and what it can do with just text. OpenAI, the company that makes it, has already released GPT-4. And though they haven't released these capabilities yet, these multimodal capabilities where instead of typing in instructions, you can give it a photo. You could take a photo of what's in your fridge and say, can you give me a recipe? What are all the things I could make for dinner tonight? So we're on the cusp of even more innovation, right on the heels of these pretty powerful things coming into our hands within the last few months, right? It's crazy the speed at which things are happening.
Well, Polly, this has been great. Thank you very much for spending the time with me today. If someone wanted to reach out and contact you, how might they do that?
Yeah, please do contact me. My website is called AI Career Boost, aicareerboost.com. So I'm polly.allen, ALLEN, at aicareerboost.com. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for there if you're interested in more about AI. And I also offer courses. We have a course coming up on conversational AI that will be for beginners, but also for product managers and designers who want to integrate conversational AI into their products. So please do check it out. We're really proud of the course we've built on the Maven platform that's about a week long, and it helps get you set up with all the basics if you want to start building your own tools that leverage these tools.
Very cool. Well, Polly, Thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
I hope you have a better idea on what ChatGPT can do and how you might use it in your career. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com and sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. When you subscribe, you'll receive my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-313. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.